In 1962, Jürgen Habermas wrote a work called The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. Though it was written in German, he described how the salons and coffee houses of 1700s England really created what he called a public sphere, perhaps the community, where people would debate matters of the community, matters and needs, and they would do so quite stridently because there were disagreements. You would have capitalists verbally sparring with communists, traditionalists arguing with feminists, and so on. The debates, at least in my imagination, were fierce, and the minds were going to be changed. It would take years to change those minds. Yet, as I understand, again, history is hard to always get the full picture, the peace was kept. If there was any violence, it was rare and not widely reported. Why do we think this is so? People able to argue with one another, sometimes even loudly, but there was no violence, and perhaps, hopefully, very little insult. I think it's because people looked each other in the eyes and saw a living human being in front of them, a person with a family, a person with a life very similar to theirs, as they were literally neighbors. Habermas is still alive at the age of 92. Based on my Google searching, it seems that he is retired and no longer writing. But if he was, I believe he'd want to add chapters on online chats and social media apps as the new salons, the new public sphere. If we take just Great Neck alone, there are so many WhatsApp groups for the different various schools and synagogues and communities. There are Facebook groups and public chats that take place on the Zooms of the villages and the various public agencies. They bring together the neighbors just like the coffee houses of old. And yes, the debates are polarized and they are argumentative. But there is a problem this time, a big problem. The exchange of ideas has become disgustingly rude. I am personally appalled at the behavior of some adults, even members of this congregation, toward each other in the chats. People are publicly insulting each other with harsh epithets. The rhetoric has become more violent and warlike, with phrases like, "How do we shoot down the other side?" I've heard individuals with ideations of violence. "I can't believe person X believes such nonsense. I could just punch her in the face." And sometimes actual violence is even threatened. Yes, I know our opinions are strong, but we're not going to change any minds anytime soon. In that way, this is the same as the salon and the coffee house. What has changed is that we have hardened our hearts towards our fellow human beings, perhaps because we're not looking at them eye to eye, and we are no longer inhibited by the possibility of shame because we don't see the looks of others' faces sitting in the coffee house or the salon, and perhaps they don't even see the looks of their rabbis or their pastors. Today, this rabbi feels compelled to share my disgust and disappointment at how fellow neighbors in Great Neck are treating each other. We have heard the term harden the heart before with Pharaoh. The new Pharaoh forgets how Joseph literally saved Egypt. He even made Egypt and the Pharaoh himself more powerful. Instead, this new Pharaoh is afraid of Hebrew population growth. He is afraid that one day they will turn on him. So he turns on them first by oppressing them. And then he attempts at population control. Neither of these things work. Israel grows stronger and mightier, and now Moses and God are angry and ready to fight back. And yet Pharaoh is so stubborn to recognize that he made a colossal mistake in oppressing this people. And he won't even change his mind as the plagues progress. And even after his own son and the firstborn of the entire Egypt he lets them go, he chases them into the sea. Pharaoh becomes defined by his hatred, his prejudice, and oppression, and really outright stubbornness to accept that he might be wrong, at least in some areas. I am really afraid that some of us might become like Pharaoh as we stridently debate our fellow neighbors here in Great Neck and elsewhere. This behavior is abhorrent and, yes, patently against Jewish teaching. The Midrash teaches Derech Eretz Kedma, the Torah. What is Derech Eretz? The rabbis define it as decency. Decency comes before, even overrides, the laws of the Torah. We are all made in God's image. The rabbis imagine that Derech Eretz is natural law in essence. Cain didn't need to murder Abel. He let his emotions get the best of him. The rabbis point out that natural law ruled for generations until Israel received the Torah. Hence the phrase, Derech Eretz, natural law, came before the Torah. Yes, the Torah is our unique path to God, to behave in the world. It is our holy teaching. And yes, we strive for all Jews to faithfully observe the Torah. We even fiercely debate the truth of the Torah and the right to be able to observe the Torah. But as we do so, we need to do so with decency and respect and humility, that there are other paths to the truth out there, and that we all possess pieces of truth inside of us. I might think it's misguided for a Jew to eat shrimp, yet that disagreement doesn't call for insults or worse. We have broken ourselves into groups, into tribes, and we often fear and distrust those who don't agree with us, those who are not in the in-group. And the art of compromise is no longer in vogue. Neither is accepting our own mistakes with humility, and that we might have faulty thinking sometimes. And we act that it is impossible that our adversary can ever have something positive to contribute. Yes, we are in the midst of multiple plagues: COVID, climate change, political polarization, and so on. We pharaohs need to wake up and soften our hearts toward each other. Let us endeavor to ratchet down the strong rhetoric. A few weeks ago, we said goodbye to Senator Bob Dole, and I eagerly listened to much of the coverage of his life and quotes. Some of them were too harsh for me, especially during the 1976 presidential campaign. He was the candidate for vice president. He called all of the 20th century wars democratic wars as a way to demonize the Democrats. Fortunately, though, as Dole lived out the rest of his life, he didn't let that rhetoric affect how he lived and governed. He often reached across the aisle to Senator Moynihan and to others. He befriended Tom Daschle, even as they served as opposing party leaders in 1995. After Daschle lost his re-election bid in 2004, Dole invited Daschle to join his law firm. Two enemies, quote unquote, who really were friends. Maybe we need to ratchet down our rhetoric. Today's date is not lost on me. We hear in the zeitgeist, peace on earth and goodwill toward humankind. It is the dream vision of our Christian brethren on Christmas. It may not be our holiday, but that message is universal enough for us to affirm. Let us affirm to think before we type, to think before we talk. Derech eretz kedma Torah. Decency comes first. If you feel compelled to type in a chat, please imagine a human being with a loving family and two eyes looking in front of you. Shabbat Shalom.